Hello and welcome to PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Valles. I'm your host. I'm also the co-founder of Optmyzr. So we're just about to go into Q4. We're just a few days away, and Q4 is obviously a huge time for retailers and e-commerce. And that's been the case for decades and decades, but the last 2 years have not been anything near normal. So we expect Q4 is still going to be huge, but it's also going to be different. And to talk about how it's going to be different, we decided to bring in two guests, one from Google and one who runs an agency. And we'll have a great discussion, hopefully today, about how Q4 is different, how to prepare for making the most of a Q4 that can be very interesting, see a lot of change, see very rapid changes from what you're used to. And so that's going to be our PPC Town Hall today. So let's get rolling with it. All right, so welcome to the show. Welcome back, Andrew. Welcome, first-timer Chris. Andrew, let's start with you. How's it going today?
So far, so good. Really excited to talk about the Q4. It's been a wild year. It's been a wild couple of years. So it'll be interesting to discuss Q4. We have a ton of thoughts for this holiday season.
Nice
so
one.
it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are. By the way, so you were just in Denmark, I believe, back in on the West Coast.
Yes, we were. So I just visited the team. We just moved into new offices over the summer. So just visited, and I came from LA, and I wore pants and a shirt and everything. And it was hot on the entire flight there. But I was like, okay, I usually always go in shorts, and I arrive and I'm so cold. And then when I arrived, it was like 25 degrees. What is that? That's like 80-ish in Fahrenheit. And it was just great weather the entire week. Going again on Saturday, and it's 2 weeks of rain. So now we're in the right kind of weather.
Nice. And one thing we like to do is ask all the attendees to say hello from wherever you're calling in from. Let us know where you're at today. And we'll pop those on the screen. We're using YouTube Live, we're using Facebook Live, and we're also on LinkedIn Live. So you can use all those platforms in the comments. We see those comments in real time. That's a great place to say hello, but also ask your questions for the panelists, and we'll take the discussion whatever direction people want to take it. Let's bring in Chris right now. Chris, where are you calling us from?
I am in the Bay Area, so also California, but a very different part of California. So it's still a little early here. You might see me sipping on my coffee as we go, but it's a nice brisk morning. So I am also in long sleeves, enjoying just the brisk fresh air today.
So are you in San Francisco or on the peninsula?
I'm in the East Bay, so neither.
Okay, I'm on the peninsula, and I am wearing the short sleeves, but okay. I am a little chilly, actually. Hey, but Chris, so you work for Google, right? So tell us what you do there.
Yeah, so currently I lead one of our e-commerce and D2C teams, focused on mid-market clients. So really focused on hyper-growth clients with an emphasis on e-commerce. I've been leading this team for about a year now. I've been at Google for about 9 years, and I've covered all different areas, mostly retail-focused. And prior to Google, spent some time as a marketing manager across different retailers such as Saks and Nike. So been in the retail space, I'd say on and off for about 12 or 13 years, seeing all different sides of it.
Nice. All right. So, and then, yeah, we got people calling in from all over the world again. That's awesome. A recent thing we started doing is we're doing a few giveaways. So if anyone else needs some coffee, we're doing a $15 Starbucks gift card. Figure if you're watching this show, you should have something warm to drink, or in Chris's case, something cold. And also a copy of my my digital book, Digital Marketing in an AI World. So the winners for that, we're going to announce them at the end of the show. But I also think we should give away a prize to everyone who engages with us on the comments. So if you even just say hello, or you ask a question, we'll pull another winner from that at the end of the live show. And we'll also pull a winner from people who watch on demand later on. I know we have friends in Australia. It's not a great time for them to watch right now, but they do watch afterwards. Okay, good. But yeah, Q4 expectations. How are things different? Let's maybe start with that. And Chris, I'd love to hear from you. And Google sitting on troves and troves of data. What have you guys?
Totally. It's funny because we do sit on troves and troves of data, but I actually don't think it requires our data to see how things are different. I think it's all around us. And everyone was chatting last year about how different 2020 was going to be. I think the only thing that's really even more different than 2020 is 2021. I think there's a lot of uncertainty coming into Q4 this year, even coming into the second half of the year, right? The great reopening, you might have seen headlines around hot vax summer, all these kind of anticipated trends and themes. With that came a lot of consumer shifts, right? In terms of consumers are finally leaving their house for the first time. Are they going to put on real pants, right? Are we going to re-enter the world in our yoga pants? Are we going to go back to the office? Are people going to dress up? Are they going to get new clothes? With that came a lot of category shifts around things like beauty and apparel, and then travel coming back online. So there was all of these expectations in terms of what would happen, right? And I think in reality, right, it was kind of a mixed bag in terms of what actually did happen. Part of that is certainly due to the Delta variant and just a lot of uncertainty. So what we're seeing really going into Q4 of this year is expect more of the same, except more of that uncertainty, especially as we're seeing other factors at play like supply chain. If anybody here has tried to shop for anything recently, like you've probably run into supply chain issues, whether you're trying to buy lumber or a bicycle or a car, like whatever it may be. So with that, we're seeing a lot of shifts and a lot of turbulence in the marketplace itself. What that's leading to is a lot of shifts in terms of how consumers are reacting, making their purchases, and even kind of driving their consideration set. And one last thing I'll mention, and I can go on and on. So, Fred, you'll have to stop me at some point. But
I mean, since you offered, I'll stop you right there for a second, right? But it's really interesting I was just reading an article. We have a huge team, or not a huge team, but our support team is mostly in Santiago, Chile, and that's one of the hottest economies. And so you were speaking about supply chain issues, and I was reading that someone in Santiago who wants to buy a vehicle right now basically has to wait for a whole year, right? So it creates consumer shifts, but it's also interesting because advertisers respond to that in interesting ways, right? If you have a 1-year backlog for people wanting to buy a vehicle, like, why would you even advertise those vehicles, right? So does that cause a shift? And we should talk about that too, but what's the shift for advertisers and how they respond to these consumer trends?
We most certainly should, and we most certainly will. There's, I'd say, a bunch of different strategies, and really it depends on which one is going to be right for your business, right? There are certain advertisers that maybe have hundreds of SKUs in a very large catalog, and then it's okay, how do we shift and prioritize? There are other advertisers who maybe have, 4 key products, which if 2 of those are out of stock, it's a very different situation, right? So I think the strategy certainly shifts and evolves depending on the shape or form of your business, but we should chat about that. And then the last thing I just want to mention, kind of going into this perfect storm of uncertainty for Q4, is data, right? We know with iOS 14, we know with privacy that we're seeing lots of, let's call it, limitations or changes in terms of the types of data we can collect. And with that comes maybe changes in our need for measurement, or our need to really rely on first-party data versus third-party data. So that's just like one other element in terms of this massive shift in terms of how approaching Q4 this year will have to be different than how we approached Q4 previously.
Yeah, and you said it's the perfect storm. Hey, but I do have to thank you and you as a representative of Google for bringing back so much of the search query data. So that was I think that happened since the last PPC Town Hall, but data all the way back to, I think it's February for queries has been returned.
I'd like to take credit and say I went to engineering and made it happen, but I most certainly did not. But I'll say you're welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, when I was at Google,
I think the supply chain issue thing is going to be really interesting. I just wanted to pull that up again because if there's something that we haven't we've had to talk about now is what do we do with the supply chains in Q4, because we saw it last year across the world. We work with US advertisers and European advertisers, and we saw it across the world that some items went out of stock that people bought for gift purposes. So last year, a lot of people had issues when buying things online for their gift purchases, and that's something that I think people are going to be a lot more worried about this year. So when we sit and we try to figure out advertising plans, then we've never talked much about what's in stock this year as versus what's in stock last year, as we've never talked as much about it. So that part of the advertising strategy is going to be huge. What do we advertise? How aggressively do we advertise for things? How much do we anticipate to go out of stock? Because we're not getting anything back if it's December 2nd. We're not having time to put in an extra order if you put in the wrong order for Black Friday and you don't have anything left for the December sales. So that's going to be interesting.
Right, as a retailer, I mean, if you haven't got your stuff on the boat at this point, like it's just not going to show up, right? There's a huge backlog of ships.
And there's there are concerns that they will even show up, so the guesswork in the amount of stock and the order quantities you're making this year have been pushed back a lot sooner, and you are going to have to make much bigger guesses, and many people will most likely be wrong. So we're going to have to navigate something where a lot of the advertisers we work have an unlimited budget and unlimited products we can sell. We're going over to something where we do not have an unlimited quantity of products we can sell. So we have to take that factor, that variable into our advertising for Q4, and something we've already started to discuss now, which we haven't done in earlier years at all.
And by the way, the no's and the yeses that we're seeing on the screen right now. So quick little poll, but have people started shopping already for the holidays? I'm a yes. I started, I think, sometime in summer.
So Fred, we have data, and I don't know if it's our internal data or secondary source, but the stat I've seen is 31% of folks have said they've started shopping. So curious to see how our chat respondents match to that 31%. But I think to Andrew's point, part of it is like, if you're not buying early, the product might not be there later. And I think you're seeing a mixed kind of result in terms of consumers understanding that or fearing that. Maybe fear is the more powerful motivator there. But I do think it's going to be like a very real scenario this holiday. And the other stat I saw, I think it was actually in an insider article, was shipping costs are up 450%, right? And like, that cost has to go somewhere. So I think
shipping costs to the retailer, right? We're still free shipping.
Right. Not for consumers. We're still getting our 2-day free shipping for now. I remember last year there's questions on like, will those costs be passed down? I don't think we saw that. But one thing we should certainly talk about within the hour here is like just thinking about profit, right? Thinking about ROI and how that might have to be different this year.
Yeah, I mean, let's jump into that. Or Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing I think Chris pulls it up greatly, and that's the whole reason why we're having those conversations about what is actually how much stock do we have. Because if we push it all at a ROAS, let's just say a 500% ROAS, or a lower profit margin for Black Friday with discounts and everything, and we have nothing left to sell for December, for those 3 weeks where you can usually get away with selling things on full price, your profit looks completely different. And that's where we really have to be careful about how much we sell up to Black Friday if we can't get more out of it, if we can't get more in stock.
Yeah, and I to the blog post, which I'll show on the screen right here. So it's on the Optmyzr blog. The title is why the shipping delays are such a huge deal for PPC. And I think we've talked about, like, are we going to have enough stuff to sell? And like Andrew's saying, we just don't have an unlimited supply of stuff. So we may not need to advertise or push quite as hard. And then like Chris was saying, a 400% increase in shipping costs. So I ran some numbers just for fun on how many Christmas trees you can stuff into a shipping container. And what was it? I think I could put roughly $150,000 worth of trees into a container. But I can put in $1.5 million worth of Christmas string lights in that same container. Now, those containers went from shipping cost as $4,000 to shipping cost of $25,000. So obviously that $25,000 on $150,000 worth of trees, that's a big impact, right? That's really going to push on the margins. $25,000 on $1.5 million in string lights, much less of an impact. And so that's where I think it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be passed down to us as when we do PPC. But what's the target ROAS that we're going to have to hit, and what's the shift in the target ROAS based on these hugely increased shipping costs? So if you want to run through some of the math and see how it might impact things, check out this article.
Andrew, I'd love your take on something as you're obviously discussing this with lots of clients. Is there's been this kind of back and forth between how should we think about promotions this year, right? Because why necessarily discount something if it's going to sell out? And I think that's where I don't necessarily have a official stance on this, but that's where I just think the dynamic nature of this year, we're going to have to be like so much more hands-on and reacting to what we're seeing in our advertisers' performance versus maybe previous years, right? Maybe promotions make sense up until the point that they don't, and they don't make sense up until the point that they do, and just being so much more dynamic. Curious, like how those conversations are going, if you're having them, and like if you're seeing any solutions.
Actually funny. It's been a core strategy that we share with clients that we don't really like. There's certain things I'll gladly talk about, but I don't put in a blog post, but I'll gladly talk about now. So one of the things that we are advising everybody to do is to at least push Black Friday, their Black Friday sales for an entire week, meaning you run it like the entire Black Week, where a lot of advertisers in the past have been against that because, like, especially in Europe, it's not quite gotten to that point where they think it's the coolest thing in the world. But the tipping point this year is we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if a 10% store-wide is enough, or it usually isn't. It needs to be 20, 25%. But this year, if we don't have that much in stock, can 10% do the trick? And that's what if we start with 10% on a Monday and a Tuesday, then we can actually start seeing if that moves the needle compared to last year and the year before. So we're trying to get advertisers to run their promotions for a longer time, so we have time to actually course correct instead of it just being Friday midnight bang. So that's what we're trying to get everybody to do, and so far we've done it with all advertisers.
And a question on that, right? So in past years, would you just basically go in and say 25%, that's the benchmark, and we're just going to run that no matter what? Because like you said, there's unlimited supply, so it doesn't matter if I sell a whole ton. Like, how are you going to deal this year with being ready to go from 10% and being like, oh my God, we sold out way more than we thought, so let's go to 5%, or let's remove it? Or let's go the other way, like the 10% didn't do it and we're still sitting on this inventory, like we need to go back to 25%. Like how are you putting systems and things in place to really respond in a matter of...
So we can't really, like, we could put systems in place to respond to it. Everything that we run are feed based. So technically we could have a feed value that pushed the inventory, and when it came below a certain inventory level, then we were good, or over a certain amount of sales. We could easily get that. However, we've seen that it's just we need some qualitative input as well. So simply just seeing that our guys only work with 3 to 5 advertisers per person, then they can easily just jump on a call per day with each advertiser, and then just see, okay, how well did we sell yesterday? Because the advertisers we work with also is not solely PPC based. So if we were just looking in our data saying, hey, it's doing great, but maybe their email is failing, their social is failing, or whatever is not selling as well, or it's completely exceeding the numbers that we're seeing on the PPC side. So having that daily contact to see, let's try to push it a little bit further, or let's try to pull back a little bit. I think once you have that week, then you can pull back and push a little bit on a daily basis. Again, it's all about having enough stock for all of December.
Yeah. Chris,
so Andrew,
go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Andrew, you mentioned 2 things there that I think we should touch on at some point. Number one, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I think I am, like just getting a really strong sense of like that quantitative input and output, and also the qualitative. And like what we've been seeing with our advertisers across the board is like you have to start early. because like there's so much more to test this year, so much more of that quantitative and qualitative feedback that we need, that like you really need to prove that out. Honestly, I'd say now, maybe up until mid to late October, because you don't want to be getting those learnings really in November, right? You want to have those learnings and then like figure out how are we going to maybe be a little more dynamic, but like this is the time to test new things. So that's number one. The second thing you mentioned around, different channels, I'm the Google person, so I'm not going to necessarily talk about other channels, but I do think it really highlights the importance of good measurement and attribution, right? I think that's also where making sure you have like a really strong sense of the apples to apples kind of comparison in terms of how do you understand like the value of each platform, not just lower funnel, right? But like assisted conversions, view through, like obviously we have solutions like DDA now, but like thinking about that to get that holistic picture.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial to get that part. Like we usually see with advertisers that's like we can all get to a certain level with just pushing like the PPC side or pushing overall, and then the numbers from an attribution standpoint. But whenever we come to a certain point, it is the holistic approach. How do we actually measure that in, and what is the target? What is the attribution supposed to look like across different channels? It's always hard, but it's where the next growth lies with most mid-size e-commerce.
And so the cross-channel attribution is certainly very complicated, but in-channel attribution, a little bit simpler. And we should probably talk about the fact that Google just 1 or 2 days ago announced that DDA is becoming the standard, the default attribution model, finally replacing last-click attribution after, 25 years? Hey, it had a good run.
Crazy. No, it didn't.
It's
horrible. It's horrible. Last click has always been horrible. I wrote an article like 3 years ago. It's like just blatantly like this is awful. Like just it's nobody's best interest to run last click.
Yeah, but I mean,
so I love it
back then, right? And like to our defense, like it was the only way to measure back then.
It was awesome. Like originally, just the way that you could measure something was just like, wow, this is amazing. So I think it's like we've been running it for a long time, not to just run last click. There's of course purposes for it, and that's where I think most of the attribution talk in channel for Google have been. Like there has been a case for when to run last click and when to run first click, and also maybe choosing one method over the other, and then using analysis using the different methodology to say, okay, hey, these campaigns could actually run at a lower ROAS target, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just glad we're not putting new advertisers default into last click because it is hurting their growth.
Exactly, especially the new ones who don't know quite as much yet. They just do the wrong thing.
Well,
Chris, I mean, I'd love to hear from you. Like DDA, it's fantastic, but it was not accessible to so many advertisers based on the volume being too low. And all of a sudden, it seems like Google figured out how to make
happy holidays. That's so. In terms of the feedback around last click, I do think the biggest challenge is once an advertiser gets accustomed to last click, like they become so laser focused on last click. And I think that's the biggest challenge historically is you kind of train like from a like learning perspective that last click is the way to look at something. And then it's really hard to take somebody and say, ooh, actually don't look at it that way. So that is why I'm really happy that, especially for new advertisers, DDA is more of the standard now, and they can start with that view because it's so much easier to start with that correct view of things versus then trying to, bring them onto something else. In terms of DDA, so data-driven attribution, to me, the biggest success here is the fact that it now looks at all of our platforms, right? So search, discovery, YouTube, because you need that holistic picture, right? You really can't measure the value or success of something if you don't understand how it's working in conjunction with everything else. And like there's so many, good analogies here in terms of like whether you're a sports fan or whatever, like if someone is giving an assist, right? Like you still get that stat for the assist versus only seeing what's happening like with the score at the end. And that's where, as we're understanding like the value of investment, we're understanding how to maybe move that media mix, that investment mix, you need to understand like what's driving things, not just the day somebody purchases, maybe the first day they're considering something, right? I was recently shopping for a bicycle, and this is like a true story, like with supply chain and everything else. And it took about 4 or 5 months for me to actually find a bicycle. And in those 4 or 5 months, I started to consider a bunch of different advertisers that I would never have considered before, considered advertisers who I never even heard of before, right? Maybe it was like seeing a YouTube ad for an online bike shop that, again, was never even in my awareness set. I didn't actually make that purchase until 2 or 3 months later, when I finally decided, okay, it's not worth waiting due to supply chain. Like, let me look at these other options. But like it all started with seeing one kind of awareness generating ad that I then converted on about 2 months later, right? So that credit never would have been there if we weren't looking at more of a data-driven attribution model.
I actually think that's a nuance that of the data driven. It didn't get as much attention as the data driven change. At least in my feeds, it didn't get as much attention. But that it pulls in different channels or different campaign types. Like search and shopping have been able to pull across each other. But when a consumer or a user went from a shopping click to a display click, it hasn't been able to make that leap before. That was actually something that I found out most people didn't know. And I didn't know that until like, I think 2018 or something like that, when we started pushing all retargeting for display and all display in general over to separate campaigns. We even took branded terms and put into separate campaigns to make sure that they wouldn't catch like that, even 50% of the credit for a conversion. So that's something I think will be very interesting to see how much credit does DDA attribute to what we know is low funnel, like really bottom funnel keywords, like a branded term, like in this case Optmyzr, because historically I feel that it has been overweighing some of these keywords. In general, if the last click, well, if it's a Nike running shoe and then Nike running shoe was the last click, awesome, needs a lot of credit. I think there's some input from us where a branded term should either just be disregarded or put completely in different campaigns. Like I would love to see that as part of DDA. I think that's the next step. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Good product feedback.
Yeah, and
so you have attribution and how like that one conversion gets split out, and the other place where we still need to do a good job is reporting the value of that conversion, and that goes to it a little bit as well, right? So if you would say, hey, the value of a branded conversion is maybe less because it was someone who looked for my brand, probably knew my brand, may have been an existing customer, right? So how do you split new customers from existing customers and value them differently? And Google is introducing a number of good options to help with that.
One last plug for DDA, and Andrew, I think you actually mentioned this earlier, is the ability to retroactively model things, right? Because it's never a one size fits all. So it's like, let's look at everything that's happening. Let's look at all the data and figure out for a given advertiser, like what mix and what model makes sense, right? Because it's not going to be the same for everybody. And you're going to have to figure out how do we want to give credit here? And honestly, like there is no right answer. Like certain advertisers might intrinsically like value things more than others in terms of, ooh, we know that this is driving brand awareness. Therefore, like, let's give it a little more credit.
Okay. Okay, there's the attribution model blog post from Andrew. We're already half an hour in. I feel like we need to talk about some other stuff because we did promise a little bit of a playbook. So let me show a couple of other things actually in the playbook. So Google put together a 4-week playbook. We can share that with everyone afterwards who's registered. So register on the landing page if you want to get a copy of this. But Chris, at a high level, talk us through maybe this 4-week game plan from Google.
Yeah, so the 4-week game plan really starts now. If not, I'd say has started already. It's a 4-week playbook, but I really think that one of the themes this year is everything is going to happen earlier. So we really should get ready for that. So I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be testing too much or tweaking too much, like in the thick of holiday, right? Like this is really the time to make sure you're getting ready. And we do have like this growth formula that we look at in terms of how we want to approach success. Like this is very much the get ready phase of things, where that means like make sure your website is ready. Make sure your feeds are ready if you're using shopping. Like make sure everything is in place right now so you're not fixing things later on. So that's really week 1, right? Figure out is your website where it needs to be? Is your feed where it needs to be? Do you understand your consumer, right? So this is the time to figure out what's happening with my category, what's happening with my customer. Also a good time to start thinking about maybe lifetime value, start thinking about profit and ROI, because those are all really the inputs you're going to need for a successful strategy, right? Especially as we think about automation and we think about really the peaks and valleys of demand that we're expecting. Like, we're going to need really good targets, so to speak, so that we know like what we're trying to achieve, and all that really needs to be figured out now. So that's quote unquote week one, but I think week one is really this larger kind of get ready phase that spans multiple weeks, leading up to, I'd say, like where we are today. Weeks 2 and 3, and again, like I do think this spans a little further, is we are expecting so much, let's call it volatility and unpredictability with demand, right? I think the notion is in previous holidays, like demand was kind of linear, then really spikes from Black Friday, Cyber Monday, kind of tapers off. And I actually think the 5th, 6th, and 7th shopping days are actually like mid-December. So it's like we see a linear rise, a spike, drops down, a few weeks later, another spike. This year, what we're expecting is more like this, right? Lots of peaks and valleys, and that could be driven by, honestly, inventory, right? So when am I seeing things in stock that I want to buy? Could be driven by market factors, could be driven by what's happening in store, meaning offline versus online. We are expecting lots more unpredictability with when that demand is there. So if it's less predictable, that just means we have to be really on top of things to take action and capture that demand in the moment. So it's not about just raising your bids and budgets during Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Like, you might want to raise everything now to get ready if those spikes are there. So that's really figuring out like how are you going to make sure like you're present? How do you make sure like you're in that consideration set, not necessarily knowing like when the consumer might be ready to buy, so to speak. And then week four assumes, again, like this is more like that Black Friday, Cyber Monday approach. This is okay, like that is when demand should be its highest. So what are the things you should do and the things you shouldn't do? So the last thing you want to do is run out of budget, right? You're just leaving ROI on the table. Like, if consumers want to keep purchasing and you're running out of budget, then that's just missed opportunity. I think something else here is thinking about like that supply strategy, that inventory strategy, where like what is your kind of shopping strategy if some of like your largest margin drivers are out of stock? Like, how are we thinking about driving profit across like the entire catalog, or emphasizing certain products, or maybe it's even more of that lifetime value, gift card, retention type strategy if we're not going to have the inventory. So that's just making sure that like we're set up for success in those peak moments, but also having a couple different plans depending on how those moments might go.
Cool. And so this playbook we'll be sharing with everyone again. And so the link for registering to get that is right there. Let's talk a little bit about week one, right? So understanding your customer is part of that. One thing, I don't know if people still look at this a lot, but Google Trends. So I think Google Trends is really interesting, really useful in these uncertain times. Just figuring stuff out, like how are consumers looking for free shipping, deals, coupons? Like, what's relatively speaking the most important thing to win a consumer's purchase? Andrew, any thoughts on, do you guys use Google Trends in any way?
Oh, we use it a ton. It can be hard to scale, but it's definitely good to understand. Like, okay, this last month, what have we? Especially like when we get are we exploiting the market just as much, or why are we not seeing as many sales this year as last year within a certain category? Then we can start pulling out Google Trends from the last month and compare it to the year before, because those numbers are like, they don't have any impact on how well we're doing from an advertising standpoint. It's simply just how many searches are there. So using that to know whether or not you need to change your efforts, which is one of the things I've talked about for years, is like sometimes you make changes to your marketing setup based on the wrong data, based on the wrong insights. If something's going wrong, try to find out if it's actually your marketing setup or if some conditions that have changed. Like now, where in Europe we saw that moving into like July is usually the worst month of the year for e-commerce because most people are on vacation. This year, everybody pushed their vacation to get Corona passports to see how close you could get to the start of the school year and still go on vacation. So you saw August actually turning into the new July. July wasn't that good, but August was just as bad as July. And using Google Trends, we could tell that after the end of August. Say like, you know what, we didn't hit some of the revenues that we had seen in some of the markets that we had, and search volumes were just much lower than we've had in the past, especially comparing to last year when big parts of Europe were locked down in August. So it's nice to have here now where you can't use this year-over-year data that us as marketers usually live on. It's like the guide it's the North Star in terms of KPIs, and we can't use that, so we need to pull in more like Google Trends. So I think it's underutilized.
And another interesting way that I'm thinking maybe using trends is as you find these new things that consumers want and the way they talk about your product. I think one thing we all struggle with is making great RSAs. What do you put into the 15 headlines, right? Like, how do I speak the language that resonates with the consumer today? And using trends to figure out, like, what are some trending queries? What are some trending ways they talk about my product? And putting that into an RSA, and then letting Google figure out how to match that to the right query. One little thing on RSAs that I hadn't realized, and hopefully this is helpful to people watching, but there's a lot of talk about pinning stuff. I always thought that you could pin exactly one thing to one position. And I think that was the case in the beginning, but there has been a change. So now you can pin multiple things to a position. So if you say want to test different promotions or different ways you talk about promotions, you can actually say, I'm going to pin these 4 headlines to position 2, and they're all variations of promotion. So one is going to talk about free shipping. One's going to talk about my 10% site-wide offer. The next one's going to talk about guaranteed 2-day delivery. And then I can basically have those rotated by Google. And they still don't show me great stats on each of these components, but at least I can look at the combinations report to get a sense of, do any of these seem to play more, have higher impressions than some of the others? So that's one way I would use trends as well.
Right, it's a great point. The other thing too is like we're just seeing so much like dynamic queries these days. I think part of that too is, again, like people might shift their consideration very, very abruptly versus previous years. I do think RSAs give you a much better shot at like staying on top of that dynamic search behavior and making sure like the most, I guess, relevant or most enticing text ads are the ones being served. And then in terms of trends, like I mentioned queries as well, right? Like this is where there's so much unpredictability where we don't know what our best queries might be, right? We don't even know who our best customers might be with those kind of rises and falls of demand at certain times. That's where I think we're really leaning into anything that's responsive, dynamic, automation really gives us a better chance, because if you're trying to manually adjust too many things, you're always going to be behind.
Yeah. And there's an audience question, actually. I'll take this one before we go to this next topic. But Jason's asking, speaking about margins and all this uncertainty and inventory, right? So, and maybe this is directed mostly to Andrew, but would you advertise less and bid less on high volume searches that have low inventory?
Yep, it's definitely a tactic we're pulling in, where normally we should have a poster inside it that's just that just says increase your bids, because that's what we usually do all of Q4: increase bids, push hard on seasonality bid adjustments, lowering ROAS targets, anything to just expand. This year, it's something we're going to be a lot more careful about, and this could definitely be one. Taking the high volume items out of your existing campaigns and pushing into maybe regular manual campaigns with lower bids, so you can control them. And if you see you have plenty of stock left after Black Friday, push them into your smart shopping campaigns or your campaigns that are running smart bidding, and just go.
So let's pause on that and like maybe repeat that for people watching. But we're talking about account structures now, right? So you seem to be using smart shopping campaigns in some cases, but in the
trying to be nice here. I'm trying to be nice. No, no. So it's mainly an audience thing. So we don't use smart shopping that much, just because we need some more leverage to push one or the other. We use smart bidding a ton, but smart shopping less, because we have less of an ability to push bestsellers over low sellers, push high stock versus low stock, and all these factors, the variables that we use in the advertising for the stores that we work with. But if we're talking to in-house advertisers, then we highly recommend smart shopping across the board for most of them, actually. And this is where pulling out products out of smart shopping and run it manually, if you need better control with how much they should be exposed, is one way of doing it.
And do you kind of have like a preset structure built based on the granularity that you think you will need, or is it truly like, hey, we'll start with these like bigger groupings of things, and then as we see things changing, we'll restructure on the fly?
So we'll usually do it on the fly. I don't think we have any accounts where it's already ready. We have a low volume campaign structure or campaign, or a low priority campaign with the campaigns that or products that we don't want to expose as much. We don't have it ready, but it's one of the things in the arsenal that we do find products that we want to push less, then we're ready to just hit the button and create them. So yes and no. It's in the playbook, but it's not in the actual campaign accounts yet.
Interesting. There's another question from Joëlie. I'm saying it the French way because it sounds like Beauchemin, a French last name. So sorry if I'm not impressed. But so would one way of tackling the margin issue due to the higher shipping cost to the retailers be to focus more on bundling instead of doing discounts?
Oh, I hate so yes, maybe, like from my point of view, maybe. But as Chris have said like a ton, there's so many things changing this year. I'm not sure this is the year to go with bundling over discounting. Like it's definitely something you could test, and like Chris says, maybe you want to test that now. Like you do have Singles Day coming out on the 11th of November. You do have you can call some Halloween sales, depending on where you are in the world and what industry you're in. Like testing it out to see what the data would be on such kind of changing it from discounts to bundling. I would not do it like, oh, now we're going to do this for Black Friday. I would be, yeah. Then you don't know if it's because the circumstances have changed, or it's your offer that has changed. And I try to, as much as possible, to lower the amount of variables so we know what the different variables have, what the effect of each variable is.
I agree. So I fully agree. There's also something in there around rising CPCs. Like we do know costs are generally going up, and again, like not specific CPCs, costs are going up almost everywhere on everything right now, right? Inflation is certainly a hot topic. But one thing I think about is, Andrew, you mentioned smart bidding. Like that's where getting really, really smart, no pun intended, around our targets. Because if we have the right ROAS, or we have the right CPA, like whatever that looks like, and then really cast a wide net, go broad, because figure out where those efficiencies are. Like the efficiencies might be in places that you're not seeing, whether it's across certain products in your feed or certain keywords. We are seeing some success around like a broader strategy in terms of targeting, letting automation really do its thing to find those efficiencies.
Yeah, and that's the other interesting thing is you have to combine automations, right? So the ideal formula seems to be RSA plus broad match plus smart bidding, and then let the machine figure it out. But that really only works if you've done a good job at your attribution model, so you're not running last click attribution, and you've done a good job with actual value reporting. And I don't think we'll talk about it much today. There's other episodes we've done on it, but basically use value adjustments. Like one thing that scared me, Chris, when you were like, hey, I know it's going to take me several months to get that bicycle. So I just went ahead and bought this one because I'm like, by the time I'm really decided, I want it to be there, right? But you probably have free returns. So I would just go and buy 5 bikes and then just return the ones I don't want, right? And so if you're not doing value adjustments reporting, if you're not saying, well, this was a sale, it looked like a sale, I told Google it was a sale, but it actually was returned. Now Google is finding you more of those buyers who might be the wrong buyers. Maybe they're the right buyers, and that's actually a whole other discussion, right? But we do have to be thinking about how do we report correctly so that these automation systems can find you the right type of consumer.
Totally.
It's a very funny thing, sorry, Chris. I just had like the numbers are absolutely insane in some markets around the world. Like fashion in Germany, you see like 50 to 70 return rates. It's insane.
I heard Germany's like 70% of clothes are returned.
It's insane. So if you don't build that, like everybody has to build into their analytics or should.
Yeah.
But it works on a lot of markets. It's crucial to have that insight with them.
Totally agree. And that's where making sure like you have that two-way feed of data is super important. It's not just, oh, the sales came in, the conversions came in, like they're great. No, like you need that ability to look back on it.
Yeah. Another question here from Nicholas. Nicholas Villeneuve. I think we have a lot of French or French-Canadian watchers today. Nicholas, please do tell me where you're from because I might have butchered your name. But what about tips and tricks to automate inventory management and campaign management? So segmenting shopping with label based on inventory is already done. Anything else besides that you would do?
Like I'm glad you put emphasis on it's already done, because I was like, yeah, like that's built into shopping that when it goes out of stock, it's done. So I think it depends how far you've taken your campaign setups. So I can say that in Savvy, we run everything on feeds. Both search and shopping, everything runs, of course, shopping runs on feed, but it means that we take feeds very, very far. So building additional data into our feeds and run start-stop products based on feed data is very, very easy for us. Sounds like Nicholas has this under control too. So I'll give him one piece that I would do. Is try to work in, instead of it being a black and white thing with availability, in stock, out of stock, then having that, like, what do you call it? Like, there's a word for it, velocity. If you can actually create a value that showcases, okay, you're currently selling this much of this item, so you'll be out of stock in 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, then you can create some value, a campaign structure or some automation in place using rules, etc., that simply just closes down products or decreases bids for products that where you have a sales velocity that means you're going to go out of stock in 7 days or 14 days, so you decrease it. That's what we would do if we had to go that direction. So definitely, and it's super smart. So super definitely do that.
I would say +1, spot on there. I think the other thing too is just thinking about volume, but also margin. So thinking about like what are the products you really want to move. And Andrew, you mentioned some savvy kind of like segmentation tactics and advice, right? Like, let's make sure if there are products that you have stronger margin on and you really want to move those, like how are you emphasizing those, maybe giving them their own campaigns and different bids and making sure that they're a like emphasized part of your shopping strategy. Pairing that with, like we're going to run out of stock on something, maybe we pull back on that a little bit. And like just figure out, is it a volume play, looking at the velocity, looking at the margin, and that's where like really reacting to what's happening in the markets can be important.
Actually, I just have one more point. Seeing that you mentioned margin, Chris. One thing that we've had that we spent a lot of time on is trying to remove glass ceilings. We actually have an article coming out about, I think today, last week, or next week, one or the other. But this thing with looking at the e-commerce side of things. So right now we're talking a lot about the advertising side, but this could just as much be that the e-commerce store that Nicholas runs, that they go out and they actually increase prices by 10%. That could also like increase their margins by a ton. Sales might go down, but they'll make more. So it doesn't just have to be an advertising thing. You go in and tweak here. It can also be in the back end.
Yeah. Hey, and since I'm the host of the show, I can do a shameless plug. But if you need any automation tools to do what Andrew is explaining, check out.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. There's a rule engine in there.
Hey, and it connects to your own data. So if you want to build velocity as a column in your spreadsheets, feed it into Optmyzr and say, hey, here's how we're going to bid based on that. Easy to do.
Actually, one of the guys runs that, so that's actually true. So
nice.
I'll do a non-shameless plug.
Good, thank you. All right. So, I was going to ask about buy online, pick up in store, or curbside pickup. Like, are you thinking that's equally powerful as like your discounting or your free shipping this year? Is that something consumers are really going to look at?
So what we saw last year, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, I'm sure I could find them, but it was certainly a triple digit increase, right? Like we saw so many consumers taking advantage of that for the first time ever. The question in my mind is how much of that was because things were sold out online, or those shipping delays really started to hit us last year. Again, like I don't have the stats in front of me, but I know there's a lot of consumers who usually it's like that 1 week shipping cutoff. Now all of a sudden it's 2 to 3 week shipping cutoff, where they were more or less forced to buy online, pick up offline. And I do think this year consumers are maybe planning ahead a little more. So it goes back to just the theme of like starting early, consumers buying early. I do think there will be strength, right? We are seeing queries rise around things like buy in store, pick up in store, near me, all that. But to me, it's a question of how much that is naturally happening because things are just more open this year versus is that really going to be a buying behavior? What I would say is like, if you as an advertiser have an offline presence, like make sure you're ready, right? Make sure that your local presence is as strong as your online presence in terms of near me type ads, local ads, making sure that like that option is present for consumers. Because I actually think it's more about in that moment, will a given consumer say, ooh, I don't want to buy this online. I want to pick it up in store for whatever reason. Maybe it's the urgency, the shipping cutoff. Maybe, again, like to the bicycle, like maybe that bicycle is only available locally and it's not available online. Mm-hmm. And that's a consumer who never would have considered you before. Maybe it's a consumer who would prefer to buy online, but like they don't really have a choice. So as an advertiser, you just want to make sure you're always present and ready if you're going to be on the winning side of that conversion.
Right, and Google has some great stats on the increase in searches for near me and how much that's gone up, and it's pretty incredible. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but
Fred, back to Google Trends. Anybody can take a look and just see what's going on.
Exactly, and then the other thing that was interesting that you said was if you assume that the free shipping cutoff is going to be much longer this year, say 2 to 3 weeks rather than a week that it used to be in the past, that is actually a long period where your buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup would be a more valuable value proposition. So have those ads ready. And that's generally the advice as well, right? Like don't wait until the last minute to create those ads. Make them now, have them reviewed, then pause them, and then they're ready to go. And the moment you need them, it's going to be instantaneous. You just flip the switch as opposed to have to wait for the reviews to happen.
Yep.
Here, so Nicholas is weighing in. 58% of Canadian consumers say they will finalize their purchase in a store after starting their journey online. And then the fun part is, how do you measure this? How do you report it back to Google, right? So there's store visits, but that's all based on modeling and machine learning. It's quite a bit harder to do it otherwise. Andrew?
Yeah, that's just it's guesswork. It's better guesswork than not having it. We use it a ton. So I'm not saying I'm not negging it, but and I think that's one of the things. Like Chris started this talk with talking about iOS 14 as well. That's also something we can't control. It's just like there's more and more things we can't control. So everybody has to get used to get over this 15-year thinking that everything we're running online can be measured 100%. I think we've been off that train for a while, but I think it's missing a general consensus that whatever numbers you're seeing in analytics and Google ads and Facebook ads, etc., that is not exactly correct. It's one side of the truth. There's the data isn't wrong, but it's just one side of the same coin when we're looking at all of it. And store visits is another one. Again, it's an input into the big machine, and we just need to make sure that we use it all properly.
Andrew, I agree. I think the other thing is back to the last click conversation. I feel like we've gotten to this point where we think everything has to be perfect, right? Everything has to be, this is the data, it's fully accurate. There's very, very little margin of doubt here. I think that actually gets in the way of success sometimes, right? Because when it comes to things like store visits, buy online, pick up offline, you're not going to get perfect attribution data. But having good data is way better than having no data, right? Don't let great get in the way of good in an instance like this. I think the most important thing is as a retailer, figure out some way to model that. Okay, we know based on a subset of our customers in a customer study or a customer survey that this many purchases tend to start on Google or wherever online. Like, let's build that into the model somehow. Therefore, we should be giving maybe non-brand search a little more credit in the upper funnel, even when conversions aren't there. So again, like finding some way to get a good sense of things is way better than not having any sort of model whatsoever. If you're waiting for perfect, it's probably not going to come. Not right now, at least.
And that is one of Google's 10 core values of innovation, core principles of innovation. Don't let great get in the way of good. And then the other one, like you said, experiment, right? So you do want to get great eventually, but the way to get there is lots of iteration. Well, good. So I'm going to ask both of you for final takeaways, or like the one thing we haven't talked about that really, really important. But before I do that, so the winners for the giveaway, we got Robert from Verizon, Jenny from Ambition. She's in Denmark. There's always the Danish connection. Andrew is here. We got a winner from Denmark.
I know Jenny, and Ambition is a very good friend of mine's agency. So it's just such a small world.
Jenny, I promise you, Andrew had nothing to do with you winning. You were randomly selected. But it was probably Andrew who told you to sign up for this. So thank you, Andrew, for that. And then we have Alejandra from Pod Marketing. And then from the live viewers today, Jason Rios. So if you want to direct message us, we'll get your information and make sure you get the Starbucks gift card and a copy of my book. All right. Awesome episode. Really good insights. Andrew, I'll start with you. Any final thoughts?
I think if we have to be a little bit practical about all these things, I think like Chris has said, like smart bidding is really, like, a lot of the automation from Google is getting better and is working really, really well. I'm not gonna beat the point to death about when you should run one or the other, but I just think that most people these days should be running smart bidding in one iteration or another. And I think the biggest mistake that most people do is that they set and forget it. Like going into Q4 and going into any high season, really working with the targets, changing the targets, having multiple targets or portfolios, using seasonality adjustments, using blackout days, using all these tools can really take smart bidding a lot further. Having that additional insight that can help it out. So when you know you're running into a big sales push, lowering your target, it works so well. It's like smart bidding works as like a constrictor to hit your ROAS target, and the second that you release that target ROAS of 500%, it takes it down. Let's say it's 300. It's like it just opens up again and just releases all these additional search terms that works. It's crazy so well it works that we usually don't talk about.
I love that visual popping from a whoosh.
Oh, I need to do it. I need to do a GIF one day on that and put it somewhere. Like, dumb.
All right, Chris, what about you?
I'll keep it simple. It's just don't assume that anything that's worked previously is necessarily going to work this year. Like, challenge all your assumptions and like get ready to redefine your objectives, right? Get ready to Andrew, like the 500 versus 300 ROAS explosion there. It's like, you might want that 300 because there's no volume coming at 500, right? But you might have to play with that a little bit. Just because 500 worked last year doesn't mean it's going to work this year. And I think the challenging thing about that is it fundamentally causes you to like reevaluate like your profit and your ROI. But the worst thing you can do as an advertiser this year, and like this is my biggest fear, especially for smaller and medium businesses, is they're going to stay on the sidelines for so long, like waiting for that moment to come, and then they're going to miss out. They're going to stay on the sidelines waiting for that 500%, and it's not going to be there. And it's going to have to be at 300%. And that means less ROI, but it means ROI versus staying on the sideline and you get nothing. So that's where like I just would really encourage everybody to like really reevaluate those objectives, really make sure you're getting ready with your strategy, start early, test early, and then in the moment, like take action when the demand is there.
Well said. Smart bidding, it's kind of automated bidding, but it still needs a lot of help to make it better. Well, good. Both of you, thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for watching. I know we've gotten a little bit off schedule, but when we do these town halls, they are always on Wednesdays at 9 o'clock in the morning. But which Wednesday? Sometimes hard to figure out. But we will be back next Wednesday, and it's kind of going to be a Canada episode. So we have 2 Canadian speakers, Dwayne Brown and Andrew Goodman, and they're going to go a little bit deeper on what we just talked about today. So they're going to take case studies from really doing amazing work in e-commerce, taking relatively small companies into like millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. And we'll hear from them how they did that. So I really look forward to chatting with them, sharing some of their secrets with the PPC community. And we'll continue doing the giveaways. So if you join us live, then you'll have a chance at winning a few goodies. But thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you for the next PPC Town Hall.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.